Okay, we're gonna start talking about chords here, and we're gonna leave the major and minor business of the third behind for just a minute. We're gonna talk about chords, and then we'll be right back to it because you'll see how important that is when we talk about chords. So let's talk about chords. Now, primarily what we're gonna be talking about here is triads. So let me explain that. The definition of a chord is really whenever you have more than one note at a time. So I've got a note here, I've got a note there. That's a chord. Let me get rid of this stuff. Let's just push this over here so that I can hear it nice and quick. Okay, here's a chord. Okay, here's a chord. This is going to be an ugly one, but it's still a chord because it's more than one note at a time. Now, when we have only two notes at a time, we call that a dyad. And a dyad is not a very common term, so don't spend a lot of time memorizing that. It's pretty rare that we have chords that are made out of only two notes. If we go up to three notes, though, we have a triad, right? So three notes, triad. That's probably the most common type of chord that we have, especially in electronic music, is a chord made out of three notes. So there's a three-note chord. This is, I just randomly put those notes down, but this is actually going to be a fairly nice one. So there's a three-note chord. That is a triad. A triad is the word we use for a chord that is made up of three different notes. Now, let me throw a little wrinkle in that for you. Let's do that. This is still a triad, right? You see four notes, but one of them is an octave. Still a triad. So when we have octaves, we can have four notes in it, but we only have, in this case, three notes, three different notes. Okay? So sometimes you'll see big chords that, have a lot of notes in them, but they are actually only triads. If you get rid of all the octaves, they're only triads. So watch out for that. But for now, let's keep it simple and just talk about three-note chords. Let's build our first chord. Now remember that, I said any three notes make up a triad, so we could do this. And technically, yes, we have a triad. This is going to be incredibly ugly. So that's not a good one, but it's a triad. What we want to focus on is building specific chords, right? Not just any notes. We want to build some chords that actually sound good. So let's build we're going to build two chords to start with, the two most popular chords, a major chord and a minor chord. Okay? So the three notes that we need are very specific notes. So we start with a note that we're going to call the root. The root is the note that the chord is named after. So if we're playing a C major chord, the root is going to be C. If we're playing a G major chord, the root is going to be G. If we're playing a G minor chord, the root is going to be G. So the name of the chord tells you what the root is, okay? So let's build a C major chord. So the root is going to be C. I know that. The next note is I'm going to go up the scale. Let me put my scale back here. Okay. So C is my first note. Now what we do is we count up the scale, and the secret here is we want the first, third, and fifth, which another way to say that would be every other note in the scale. So this is the first, this is the second, this is the third. We want that one. This is the fourth, this is the fifth. And there we go. We have a major triad in C major. Okay, so let's hear this. Let me get rid of these notes. So here is a C major triad. Right? We have the first, the third, and the fifth. So we know what the interval of a fifth is, right? We've looked at that. And we know what the interval of a third is. And we know that in the key of C major, this particular third is a major third. And that's what makes it a major chord. If this was a minor third, it would be a minor chord, right? The fifth is the same. So the only difference between a major chord and a minor chord is the third. The root and the fifth are still exactly the same. So here's a major chord. If I want to turn that into a minor chord, I just have to take the third down to a minor third, like that, and now I have a minor chord. But now I'm not in the key of C major anymore because that note isn't in C major. But that's okay. It was just an example. So the key to remember here is the root, the third, and the fifth is what makes the major chord, no matter where you are, really. The root, the third, and the fifth. So let's look at the difference between the major and the minor chord one more time. Now, we know now that the difference is the third being 1/2 step different, right? Major third, minor third. Major triad, minor triad, right? Let's do this. Let's put this back to major. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to change this to minor. Okay, so now we have a C major chord here and a C minor chord here. I want you just to think about the way these sound a little bit. I'm going to slow this down so we can really hear it a little bit better. Now, typically what we say, and this is a very kind of fluffy thing to say, but when we're talking about the difference between major chords and minor chords, what we say is that major chords sound happy and minor chords sound sad. Now, that all depends on the context. You can make a minor chord sound pretty happy in the right context. Do you feel the kind of sad quality in this one? Let me go up an octave. Let's try it up here. You can hear it a little bit, I think, in this setting. It's kind of hard to hear because we don't typically do this. Going from a major chord with the root of C to a minor chord with the root of C, switching between basically the chord with the same root, but going between major and minor, alternating like that, is not a very typical chord progression. So you won't find that in a song very often, sometimes, but it's not the most common thing. So it sounds kind of strange to us to do it. But hopefully you can hear kind of that sadness and the happiness, I guess, the happiness between the two chords, the major and the minor. And if you're looking at one of these, remember that our trick to telling if one was major or minor still is all about the third, and we can just use that trick of counting half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a major chord. We don't even care about the fifth. The fifth is going to be the same. Look, between the major and the minor, the fifth is the same. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that's going to be a minor triad, right? When we're looking at triads, if you want to count half steps to tell if you're looking at a major or minor chord, after you get to the third, you don't need to count anymore because the fifth is always the same. We don't change that between a major and a minor chord. The fifth stays the same, as does the root. The root stays the same as well. Let's make another chord. Let's get rid of all this. So let's make a chord. Let's stick to the key of C major. Now this is where things get a little confusing. So we're in the key of C major. So let me write that out again. Just going through the pattern. So in the key of C major, let's build a G chord. Okay, I want to build a G major chord in the key of C major. Now, here's the trick. I don't really even have to specify whether or not this is going to be a major or minor chord because that major or minor third is completely dependent on what key I'm in, right? if I build a G chord in the key of C, I go every other note. So this is now my 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, and then 5 is going to be up here. I just have to cycle around to that again. So here is a G chord in the key of C. So it happens to be a major chord because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to be a major triad in the key of C. If it was a minor triad, it would be like that, and that note, that A sharp, is not in the key of C. So the only G chord, the only chord built on G that works in the key of C major is G major, not G minor. Now that is an important concept that we're going to spend the whole next section talking about that. So if that doesn't quite make sense to you, just hold on to that for just a minute, because our next unit is all about chords that work in a given key and why that's important. It is incredibly important for songwriting. Let's do this one more time. Let's get rid of that. Let's do a D chord. Okay? So with a D chord, here's my root. In the key of C, D, I'm going to skip a note, then I'm going to go to F, then I'm going to skip a note, and I'm going to go to A. So here is my D chord in the key of C major. Is this a major or minor chord? 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is a minor chord. So the D chord that occurs in the key of C is a minor chord. More on that in the next section. So now that we know how to make a couple chords, let's put them together into a little chord progression, right? Let's go to the next video for that.